Good morning, friends and family. I hope you guys are doing fantastic today. I had a conversation this past week with one of my daughters about sin and faith and worry and doubt. It's odd to me how these days lots of teenagers that I know have been around or and have heard say that they're stressed out and that they have, they're just plagued with anxiety. And, whenever I was a teenager, I don't remember being worried about anything. I don't remember anxiety was like a farce to me. It was, like you had mental issues if you had anxiety as a teenager. And I don't think that I lived that much of a fairy tale teenage life, especially for those of you who knew me as a teenager. You know that I didn't live in a bubble. I ran around with some rough guys and did some dumb things. If there was a reason to be worried, I had plenty. It is a sin to live in a state of worry and anxiety. She told me, my daughter was saying, Dad, what are you talking about? It's because she was talking about how much anxiety she has, and I was like, what? What do you mean? What are you anxious about? And she started listing off all the stuff that she does. And I'm like, well, stop doing some of it. She hates the simpleton approach. And I have been that kind of a person my whole life. And to my detriment, probably, because sometimes it's just not simple, right? Because for me, I'm just like, well, just stop doing that and eliminate it, right? Or start doing this and that won't happen anymore. I think that there are a lot of people, including a lot of people watching this video right now, who wake up worrying about stuff. They wake up in a state of worry. They spend most of the hours during the day worried about something. Or even worse, because worry is associated with future events, right? So fear is the tree that worry grows on. You have regret that grows on that tree, looking back into the past and wishing you were still with that person at that age, doing this, had that job, making that money, younger, healthier, whatever. You look back into the past and you wish that you could go back, right? So there's that state. That's not worry. Or a self-loathing, like you don't like where you are or who you are, so you wish you could go back to who you were and where you were. And then worry is more associated with the future. What's going to happen tomorrow? What's going to happen next? Where am I going to be in 5 years? Where am I going to be in 5 days? So there are a lot of different ways that the enemy tries to get us distracted from what it is that God has built us for. And I have gone through and I have scoured over the scriptures. And scripture says that to doubt God is a sin, period. It also says that sin is a transgression. In 1 John, it says sin is a transgression of the law. And the law that it's talking about is the Ten Commandments. And we know that when Jesus came, he kind of upgraded the Ten Commandments. In fact, he says that I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law, What does that mean? It means that he came so that those of us who are incapable, which is all of us, of fulfilling the obligation of being perfect according to the law, he came to be that perfection for us, so he could fulfill the law, the Ten Commandments. Jesus did not break any of the Ten Commandments. And so by default, he fulfilled that law for us and then took all of our sin on himself on the cross, which that's a whole different video. He says that he didn't go into a certain city for unbelief. Now, I do want to say, for somebody who doubts God perpetually and who is in unbelief totally, that is a sin. It is a sin to not believe in God. The sin that I'm talking about and the worry and the anxiety that I'm talking about is the kind that we believers have. And it's not okay. That is not okay. No matter what, doubting God is the root of anxiety. It is the root of worry. Because if you're worried about what's going to happen next, by default, that means you don't trust God with what's going to happen next. You either trust him or you don't. Now, I can say I trust God in the big picture, right? I trust that we win the battle. At the end of the day, we win the battle. But I'm worried about whether or not I'm going to get this job. I'm worried about whether or not I'm going to close this sale. I'm worried when my daughter's out till 11 p.m. at night and driving home. And it's like, well, in those scenarios, I should trust God equally as much as I do in any other scenario. He's not in any less control then than he is now. I want to encourage you that, number one, if you're plagued by worry and anxiety, those are branches on the tree of fear. And if you live in a perpetual state of doubt, worry, anxiety, then the enemy is blocking you from your true potential. There's this great version of you that's not weighed down by those things. And that person is waiting for you. You have to make a decision in your mind first. Remember, be, do, have. You got to become something before you can do something, before you can have something. So you can't just have it. You got to be something first, and then you got to do something next. So when Jesus spit in the mud and rubbed it on the guy's eyes, I'm sure, because remember, back in those days, like to spit on somebody would be super offensive, unclean, And not only that, he spits in mud. And I'm not sure if I would just rather have spit or spit and mud. But he spits in mud, rubs it together, and puts it on the guy's eyes. And then he says, go down to the pool and wash it off. So the guy first has to believe. He has to believe that what Jesus just did is going to work, right? Otherwise, he could just be like, man, get this mud off my eyes. What are you doing? So first he has to believe, right? Then he has to do something. Then he has to walk. So with mud on his eyes, he's probably got a stick or something, right? He's feeling his way down to the pool, and he's just thinking, man, I hope this works, right? I mean, he had been blind for decades, and then he has to wash it off, right? So he has to become something. He has to do something in order to have something. And that is a principle. That is a pattern in the Bible. What we ought to do in our lives when we're talking about worry and we're talking about anxiety, I want to encourage you today that anytime you have anxiety, it's going to just suck the life right out of you. It's going to suck the energy out of you to get the result that you want that is opposite of the one you're worried about. So one thing begets the other. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you're focused on lack, then you're in a state of fear. And if you're in a state of fear, you probably are paralyzed. You're not able to do anything about it. And so inevitably, your inaction propagates the result that comes with lack. That's why I say that if you look for lack, you will find it. If your default is to look for lack, you will find it. However, a good example is, I don't know, maybe you weren't this way. I'm like a Christmas nutcase, so I admit it. And I don't care what anybody says about it, if it's a pagan holiday and all the rest, whatever, I don't care. I still love it as much as I've ever loved it since I was born. I still love it. I get super pumped. Even to this day, I'm 53, and to this day, I get super pumped on Christmas Eve because Santa's coming. But as a little kid, I remember my parents, would say, you gotta get in bed. If you don't go to sleep, he won't come. He's not going to come while you're awake. And he knows when you're awake, right? You know the song. He knows when you're awake and he knows when you're sleeping. By default, it was almost impossible for me to go to sleep because I was so excited. Anticipation was so high that it was almost impossible to go to sleep. And I would argue that God put that in us. God put what in us? That anticipation, that the energy associated with anticipation that has hope attached to it. So let's say that you have a job interview coming up, right? And you're worried that you're not going to do well. You probably won't, if you're worried that you won't. However, if you are super excited about it because you know you're qualified, you know that there's nobody else out there like you, you know that you will be an asset to that company. If they're lucky enough to have you, you will blow them away, right? And that is the attitude that energizes us. So anxiety sucks the energy out of us, and anticipation fills us up with an energy that gives us the ability to do the thing that you have to do to get the result that your anticipation is aimed at. So the probabilities of you getting a better result go way up when you're positive about it than when you're negative about it. It's amazing how this works. And it's not a trick. This is just the way we were built. This is the power of words and thoughts. I am a person who, after the shooting, if somebody pulls up beside me and the windows are all blacked out and and I don't know, I can't see in their car or whatever, I always leave room in front of me so I can do something. If somebody gets out of a car, if somebody does something, like, I can't help it. I'm on high alert. And I shouldn't say that. I could help it, but I still struggle with just being a little apprehensive about being in a confined space with people I don't know. I'm not trying to pretend like I don't struggle with the same things that many people struggle with. What I'm trying to say is there is a solution. And I do not live in a state of fear, and I do not live in a state of worry. I do not. And so I do not struggle with that. I don't have anxiety, daily anxiety. The beautiful thing about what happened to me is that I compare everything to it. Somebody will say, "Geez, Plummer, I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. That's terrible." And I'm like, well, at least I didn't get shot. Because I've been shot before, and that sucks way worse. And so everything stacks up next to that. Remembering that being like a major turning point in my life. I had only been saved for 8 months whenever I got shot. And so that was a huge thing in my life. Whenever I look back at that, I'm like, that's the turning point. That's the marker. That is the barometer. Like everything else outside of that, there's only a few things that could happen that would be worse than that. And that's losing family. Outside of that, losing a job, losing anything really. Other than your health and your family, everything else is like whatever. I love you guys. More importantly, the Lord loves you. He does not want you to worry. He does not want you to have anxiety. He does not want you to be plagued by fear. He says, do not fear more than he says anything else in the whole script, in the whole Bible. I want to encourage you, do not be afraid. Do not let anxiety plague your life. If it is, it's blocking you. It is blocking you from having the things God wants you to have. Be blessed by the best. See you guys on the next one.